Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Society with Barrister Fatma Shine at PTV World. They say that climate change is not only a struggle for power, rather it is a struggle for survival. Now, if that is true, we need to start talking about climate change, and not only talking about it, we need to take proactive action to combat it too. Why is climate change today more of a social justice issue as opposed to being merely an environmental or an economic issue? How does it impact women, children, elderly population compared to men? And what all is the Pakistani government, Pakistani civil society and responsible citizens of Pakistan doing in order to fight global warming and in order to combat climate change? This and much more we'll be talking about in our today's show, and to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Ahmad Rafe Alam, who is an environmental lawyer, and he's also been the former member of Climate Change Council. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and welcome to the show. Alongside him, I have Qudsiya Rahim, who is a social activist, and she's also the co-founder of Afforestation Lahore Group. Assalamu alaikum, Qudsiya, and welcome to the show. And my third panelist for the show today is Zara Gilani, who is the co-founder of Go Green, alongside being the climate change policy advisor. Assalamu alaikum, Zara, and welcome to the show. Sir, I would like to start the show with you and to get the basics straight. First of all, when we talk about environmental changes, the most pressing environmental change that Pakistan, rather the world, is faced with today is that of climate change, which is why we have the show here today. So what are the main reasons because of which climate change actually accrues?
You have to understand how bad the problem is first, because we are approximately 1.1 to 1.2 degrees warmer than the Earth was before the Industrial Revolution. And at 1.1, 1.2 degrees, we are already seeing forest fires like we saw in Australia and California. There was a forest fire in the Arctic for the first time in recorded history. Oceans are acidifying, coral reefs are bleaching. We've entered a 6th extinction event, and there are plastics in our bodies. The amount of greenhouse gases, the things that cause climate change, are at a level so high right now that there is no comparison on Earth. You have to go back nearly 25 million years to find a level of carbon that we have in the atmosphere today. 25 million years is much longer than the entire human civilization's experience on the face of the Earth. And at that point in time, 25 million years ago, oceans were 16 meters higher than they are today. Hundreds of millions of people on threat of death because of air pollution, because of lack of food, and because of civilizational collapse. Now, you're trying to frame it in a country way, but in order to properly combat climate change, it's my opinion that you can't take a faltering Earth, divide it into 200 different countries, and then have them compete with each other. This is the society that we're talking about.
Of course.
We have to drive the state by changing how society looks at this problem.
Exactly, globally.
Globally. Now, globally, we are way beyond what anybody considers safe. We are at a point of civilizational collapse. You have to understand what that means.
Of course, we'll be coming to that, but I would want us to talk about Pakistan first and then move on to the rest of the world. But coming to you, I think, what do you feel are the most, pressing causes when we talk about environmental challenges, especially climate change, because that's the topic of the day, especially when it comes to Pakistan?
I do agree. We should not give it a milder name. I think it's a major climatic disaster that we all are going through, and we all are living it, right? Focusing more on our country, focusing more on our various cities. So we also understand the macro and the micro, right? Let's talk a little bit about the micro view, where we're looking at this country and the various climatic disasters that have taken place over the course of time, and how, we have been affected by it, perhaps, or how what we can do to make these, better, because they are not going to stop
anytime soon.
And
if you were to talk about the reasons, which cause climate change, what would those reasons be?
So let's just look at human activity for a bit. And what you have you're suggesting to look at it in two ways. There's human activity, which is domestic human activity, and then there's a commercial industrial human activity. So when we're looking at the more domestic activity, a lot of times people stress on that, because we're always looking around us and we're saying, oh, we have ACs on in our house, and that that's contributing, and we're saying we are not disposing of our waste properly, those kind of things. If the four of us, for 10 minutes we say we try and litter as much as we want to, right? So whatever the consequences of that would be after 10 minutes versus a factory running on fossil fuel for 10 minutes, there's a huge disparity between these two.
Of course.
So I think,
but
so
we
need
have to consider
to
the reasons in their entirety, whether they are stemming from individuals like us or whether they are coming from corporations. Do you agree with what she's saying?
Yeah, very true. You know, I would like to say that, you know, each one of us has to be conscientious. It is very important to spread awareness at this time, I really believe, because, you know, we as a nation, you know, a lot of people are illiterate, and because of their illiteracy, they do not understand the gravity of the situation. And those who are literate, even they are not understanding it. So we need to spread the awareness.
Compared to, you know, maybe other issues, I think people are still more comparatively cognizant, and they are aware. We'll come to that, and we'll also talk about the work that you are doing in this regard. Why is it more of a social justice issue then?
It is more of a social justice issue because, you know, we are not doing justice. You know, we are not taking climate seriously, and we need to take steps in the right direction. You know.
So what would those steps be in your view?
The way the world is configured, the global south, the developing world, has far more people living in it than the global north. And the way climate change is going to impact people is not depending on what country they are in, it depends on how rich they are.
Right. Sir.
Right. So as you look at the global south, the impacts of climate change, the food shortages, the changes in weather, the incredible heat events that we're already seeing in Canada and even here in Pakistan. Remember in 2014 there was a week-long heat event in Karachi that killed 1,500 people. So you see, when you talk about a heat wave, you have to understand how that's a social justice issue, because people like myself, I'm very privileged that I have access to electricity. But people who don't have access to electricity, who don't have air conditioners, are at risk of death because of these increases in temperature.
And so even for that matter, this is the main reason why UN has also made this a gender sensitive issue, because women, if you compare, they are more disproportionately affected, even children and, you know, elderly people as opposed to men. Would you want to add something to that?
Can I just 1 second add, because my dear friend Sara Hayat, who's a climate lawyer in Islamabad, reminded me that one of the reasons, for example, why so many women perished in the 2010 floods, and that's a social issue as well, it's because in our society we don't teach women how to swim. And so women are more vulnerable than men when it comes to the impacts of climate change, and that's why they must be in all sorts of climate adaptation policies. Women must be included.
Exactly. And even when the tsunami came, I was going over this report, you know, when I was preparing for this show, that the ratio of men being, you know, saved was 3 times more than that of women, because exactly for the reason that they didn't know how to swim, they were looking, they were waiting, you know, to maybe get hold of their children or other belongings. So I think women need to be a very important part of these climate change policies. So what is your take on that? Because I know you are also very actively working on this.
I think we need to understand that access of resources, for example.
Right.
Movement of elderly is very important. Healthcare is very important. You know, we need to. Women are more susceptible to look after the families, which is why also they're left behind. You know, they are collecting the household.
I think that's a very valid point you've raised, Qudsiya, because I think this point of leaving behind, I think it affects as it is disproportionately. But there are a lot of migrations also taking place inside Pakistan, because of which women are more disproportionately affected. You would want to add something to that?
Yeah, definitely women are, you know, more affected because, you know, they're also physically weaker.
Right.
And when something strikes like, you know, catastrophe, and you know, men, you know, can easily escape, you know, they're left behind.
Or maybe because of cultural norms, women are not allowed to leave a certain place. They have to stay back because they have to take care of the
our culture is also very dominating.
Children, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
very true.
So I think this thing needs to be considered in the women context, and also for that matter, something which we were earlier discussing as well, Zara, before the show, in the cultural heritage, you know, context as well. That, you know, when people are leaving one place and moving to the other part, so they are leaving behind that culture in that regard. So do our policies, do they take into account all these considerations? Because we are just not talking about climate change, we are also talking about issues which are stemming from climate change.
You see, climate change is not a single issue, it's what we call a threat multiplier. It operates on many scales. We are lucky enough to have a climate policy of 2012, but you know, it has been nearly 10 years since it was passed, and I think it's time for a review, because the policy was passed at the time of the 18th Amendment, when these sort of governance issues should and are actually the responsibility of the provincial governments. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is that none of the provincial governments have actually come up with their own policies.
Right, sir.
So it's really up to provincial governments, and equally now after the Supreme Court decision, local governments to be sensitive to climate change as well.
I think that's what is needed, a place on the table for the women, you know, children. We don't have any study of how, you know, climate change affects children, for example. I mean, they are still you know, women activist groups like WAF and Human Rights Commission, those kind of.
If I may,
Yeah.
a lot of air pollution is actually greenhouse gases, and children are especially vulnerable to pollution. In Pakistan, our cities have been found to, citizens in our cities have been found to lose up to 2 years of their life expectancy on account of air pollution, and in Lahore, it's 5. Which I can't
Because
think
of the smog, sir?
Smog and also
smog
lung.
children are most
Exactly.
vulnerable,
Lung
and again
diseases.
people who have to commute and go outside for work. So again, you see
Exactly.
the
The effect is
effect is
different.
on the scale of affluence.
Something which you, exactly. It depends, you know, which part of the Pakistani society you belong to, what socioeconomic status you have. But since we are talking about, you know, migration, I want, you know, you to address that in detail. When we talk about the migration issue, sir has pointed out that there's no law, there's no policy particularly to address this issue. If we were to look at them, then, you know, how can civil society like yourself, or even for that matter government and your CBOs, community-based organizations, work to, you know, mitigate that effect that has on people who are migrating?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is information sharing. I think it's very important. And another thing that we need to actually recognize, I think our panelists also spoke about it for a bit, is recognizing that one is privileged. So if we are people who have a certain privilege of knowledge, of understanding some of the greater issues and smaller issues or intricate issues, and then, you know, taking ownership of that and then creating some kind of information dissemination kind of system. I think those kind of things are very important. Internally displaced people, I think it's perhaps, we don't talk about migration and immigration in our general conversation. We know that somebody has moved out from.
Yeah, but this is something which must not be ignored, because we are talking about climate change and its social effects and effects otherwise. You have been working not particularly on migration, I believe, but you've been working with the High Court, and you've also been, you know, contributing in that regard when it comes to policy and, you know, policy which regulates climate change. So tell us about that.
Basically contributed to the policy that was drafted on urban forestation in 2019, when the Honorable Lahore High Court you know, asked us to be part of a committee that would give suggestions on the subject policy. And we gave them quite a few suggestions that were included in the policy, and we were very happy that you know, that draft was accepted at the federal level in February this year, 2021.
And could you tell us what the policy is exactly about, the draft which that did get accepted?
It was a very extensive policy. It covered a lot of areas. We were particularly concerned with the civil society engagement in that. And we suggested quite a few things like, you know, the research should be included, and the universities should be, the research departments of the universities should be taken into account. You know.
So basically, I think there was this particular part in the chapter which was approved, part 7, which refers to the importance of engaging people when it comes to fighting climate change.
It's very important.
So practically, how is that, you know, translated?
You know, the civil society needs to be engaged and work with the government.
Right.
So for that, you know, partnerships are really important. We suggested that conducting workshops, you know, to spread the awareness of urban forestry and how to do that. So, you know, spreading educational awareness, making it mandatory. Some diploma courses on urban forestry should be introduced in all the universities and educational institutes.
So what in your view is the most important thing then to combat it? Yeah.
Greenhouse gases are when we take carbon out of the earth and burn it for our transport and energy needs. So that's coal and petroleum and things like diesel. And also agriculture produces a lot of greenhouse gases, the rice that we eat, the meat that we produce. So these human activities are creating greenhouse gases that are increasing the Earth's temperature. And this temperature is creating unprecedented and unexpected changes in long-standing weather patterns. Now these unexpected changes in turn are causing climate events like heat waves, floods, tornadoes, and ensuing food shortages as well, and many other things. We see the forest fires, and in Pakistan just last year, do you know that 2020 there was a national emergency declared on account of a locust invasion in Pakistan, and locusts breed because of wet winters, and it's been unseasonable
and
wet
the rains
winters.
that we had in Karachi, sir.
The rains in Karachi are a fantastic, very good illustration of a social justice issue as well. Because you had 2 days of rain that knocked out Pakistan's capital, commercial capital for 2 weeks, and we're seeing the fallout of that with the cleanup activity that we're seeing in Gujarat as well, creating a social justice movement in an attempt to prevent further climate actions.
Right, sir.
There is no safe amount of global warming. Although this 1.5 degrees that we hear about, the level set by the Paris Agreement that the world has sought to keep climate temperatures or global temperatures underneath 1.5 degrees by the end of this century, has to be understood as the politically acceptable level of loss that politicians are willing to take. It's not as if it will start getting dangerous after 1.5 degrees. It's already dangerous. For instance, we have enough carbon in the atmosphere today to lock in a 2-degree temperature increase by the middle of next decade. And the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees of warming has been calculated to be about 150 million deaths, mostly in Asian and African cities on account of air pollution from the transport sector. Now, I need to remind you that 150 million deaths by the end of next decade is 4 times the number of people who died in World War I and World War II put together.
Oh my God.
And these are our cities. This
Right.
incident I was telling you about air pollution in Lahore, that's how the climate crisis is affecting children, pregnant people, and elder
the
citizens.
elderly people as well.
At most, and the rest of the population as well.
And depending on their,
Now,
social
when you
economic
talk
status.
about what's causing climate change, I want to address this.
Yes, sir.
Because, as I said, it's not necessarily about community engagement.
Right.
It's my belief that climate change and the climate crisis has been brought about by systems. And unless we recognize and dismantle these systems, we're not going to be able to do anything about climate
So,
change.
but do you not think that community needs to be engaged in
These
that, like partly?
systems are, and community is important. So these systems are capitalism,
I'll come to you.
patriarchy, colonialism, consumerism, and the fossil fuel economy. We
Right.
need to have an economic system that provides accountability to the extraction of resources and the manipulation of human labor. And as Qudsiya said, we need to have more women participating in the decision making when it comes to climate futures.
Of course, we make up
We
half
have to
the
change.
world.
We have to change our habits because it's these
It's a lifestyle
consumptive
change,
habits,
so,
and especially
right.
on the scale of affluence. Because I, as somebody who drives a car, pollute far more than a farmer in Bhakkar. Yet my carbon footprint is nothing compared to the billionaires who travel in business class or have an SUV. So these habits of consumerism also have to be addressed.
So, it's a systematic change,
It's
sir,
a system
along with, of course,
for
community
which
engagement.
society needs to
needs
be
to act.
engaged, fighting these crises.
I think you would have something to say on this because you are working very actively out there, both of you in your own separate capacities with and without the government.
So we think that it is people who constitute, I mean the people who constitute the society, right? And the people amongst us who are running the government, people amongst us who are artists or running these factories or established, commercial units or decision makers or influencers. So I think it's the way that we are looking at it is that we are trying to reach out the community, and through that we are influencing the decision makers or the influencers, and completely agreeing with what Rafi is saying.
Exactly.
But we also understand that with changing one person, one mindset leads to another. And if we make a few corrective measures at home, then you take that mindset and you feel good about it.
Of course, as they
And
say,
then you take
charity
that
starts
mindset
at
to the
home.
office, and then the office you make a few corrective measures, and that you take to the factory, and then you make few corrective decisions there. So the more we all get involved, because we're all citizens of the society, and that we
And
constitute.
I think the best thing about your foundation and this ALJ is the fact that you have people from all walks of life,
Correct.
young people and corporations, lawyers, artists like yourself.
Correct.
So I think it's a good forum in which not only civil society and government get to work together that way, but also you're involving so many different people, which I as a social activist don't see in many other social issues, be it, harassment, be it acid attacks, so many other things that, I take up on my shows. So coming to you, Zara, we've generally been speaking about climate change as a social justice issue, which both of them have highlighted. But, we also see that COVID-19 has added a new dimension to it. It has inevitably put it at the back burner. So how do you see this?
This is a tragedy. COVID-19 is a tragedy, and we see that a lot of people are being affected. The human activity was curtailed. People were, not doing, what they were doing.
Right.
It was not normal. Everything was being shut down. There were lockdowns. Human activity was curtailed. There were no vehicles on the road. Car emissions stopped. The industrial activities were stopped. Trade, tourism, everything was put on halt. So suddenly we realized that there was improvement in the environment because of the lack of the car emissions, the carbon that was released in the air, the pollution.
But this is, I was going over this report which says that this is only 5% lower than what it was before COVID-19.
But
and again, this is temporary, Zara.
But even then, it was noticeable.
Right.
And it improved the environment. Some studies showed that the ozone layer, repaired itself in a year's time while people were in lockdown. But the thing is that it's just a silver lining to this, sad situation of the COVID. We have to look at more sustainable ways, that are going to take us forward, like switching on to renewable energy sources and stop using fossil fuels, because fossil fuels are basically, one of the big culprits that are polluting the environment and contributing to the green gas effects. So for that reason, we need to look at the alternative energy solutions.
I think that's a very valid recommendation that you've put, but I think generally, like something which Rafi also pointed out, we have to make that whole lifestyle more climate friendly. Coming to you, sir, would you want to add something to that?
Well, yes, actually, the reduction of human and economic activity during the lockdowns did make a huge impact improving the environment, reminding all of us just how much human activity pollutes the earth. But at the same time, the COVID lockdowns also resulted in governments around the world giving stimulus packages to industry to get the economies going again.
Right.
Now, we live in 2021 when sustainable technologies are not just on the market, they're within financial reach. And 2020 has to be remembered as one of the largest transfers of capital from one to the other in the history of the world. These stimulus packages, when you look at them in aggregate, various countries giving to corporations and sectors, is the largest transfer of capital in the history of humanity. And it was a one-time opportunity to invest in sustainability because those things are present and with us. The Global Sustainability Index was a report published by a German NGO that reviewed all of the stimulus packages given by various countries to various sectors and found that other than a handful of countries in the European Union, almost all the stimulus that was provided in 2020 was to fossil fuel-based unsustainable industries. So I'm sorry we lost a once-in-a-civilizational chance to be able to do something about this. And it goes back to the culpability. Look, we are in a climate crisis where the future of human civilization is under serious
to stay. We are hoping that we'll get out of COVID.
And we have politicians who are continuing the status quo for votes. It is inexcusable that they do so.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, something which I said in my introduction as well, it's about the survival, because we don't know how many more pandemics we might, God forbid, be faced with. But climate change is something that we have to, bear with, unfortunately, because it is that one place, environment is that one place where we all live in.
I point out that
and
in Pakistan today,
yes,
renewable energy tariffs are actually cheaper than fossil fuel tariffs. If you compare solar and wind to things like thermal or coal even, or even hydel, they're cheaper. And yet the stimulus packages announced were for the construction sector and the textile sector. So again, a chance and opportunity missed.
Right. Coming to you, Kudsi, I think in this regard, a very important thing which we must address is the fact that when we talk about climate change and when we talk about it in the context of COVID-19, we see that, countries who have, gotten funds for that matter have preferred to use it for COVID-19 for addressing the pandemic as opposed to addressing the climate change. So I think in that regard, they aren't wrong too, because at any given point in time, they would want to, address something which is the need of the hour, which right now at least is the pandemic.
The different issues, the totally different issues, totally at a place where they are world disasters, right? And so we can't compare one from the other, and when we can't justify one from the other.
Right.
But then, of course, I think there are a lot of important things that Rafi has said when we are looking at politics over social issues. These kind of things will happen, right? But we're also the planning and development of cities and urban units, those kind of things. If they are also considered with keeping the various diversities and various conditions that a city has to offer, I think those would be the right way to move forward, because development is also necessary. You can't say that, you know, you can't compare one to the other. Nobody is asking, none of us is asking us to move back to the back in time. We all want progress. We want to all see development and
development is something that you have been working on as well.
But we
in the
need
sense
to
of plantation drives and trees.
So sustainable development, right?
Okay,
So we
right.
need to actually just look at it slightly differently.
Okay.
What is sustainable development? Is there something like that? Town planners, we need to actually engage with town planners, you know, and what does it mean? So for example, a healthy environment. So for example, just coming back to Lahore,
Right.
That's how we all got started, was that Lahore had lost about 75% of its tree cover, right, in the last 20-25 years. Reasons we all can imagine and understand, is very easily attainable. So so those kind of things are very important. So when LDA, we thought we had lost 75% through our studies and research, and when LD was asked, we have 0.6% of tree cover in the city of Lahore.
ALG, which is your Afforestation Lahore group, that started in 2019. So
Yes.
since 2019 to 2021, how many trees have you planted?
So, so it's a group. It's a collective effort of government and civil society members. The group was formed to actually bring resources together, bring expertise together, and to work on climate action together, right? And actually we were able to do quite a lot of really good work. We understand while there are lots of other elements that are out of our reach, and we are but we do understand that tree or loss of tree cover was very important, and since the last 2 years we planted about 1,800,000. So this
That's quite a lot.
monsoon, we will be planting over 2 million trees.
Wow.
That's
And
amazing.
this
That's
is
so
the
impressive.
all in the city of
But
Lahore.
it's all in the city of Lahore. I think the scope should extend to other. I think you would agree with me on
Should
that.
be everywhere.
There is, seriously, honestly,
We're focusing
why
on
should
the
Lahore
micro
get
cli-
all the privilege that way?
So Lahore is in stress, and in stress for obvious reasons. And we as citizens of Lahore, we've taken on this challenge because, of course, saying whatever, we're working on the microclimate of the city, and trees play a major role in that. So let's say,
But I
hopefully,
do hope you're planning to expand as well. Kutsia.
we have a lot of interest, and we're working with a lot of other cities also. We're working with PHA quite heavily. We work with the Commissioner's Office. That's under where the Afforestation Lahore group resides.
And you're also working with her, Zara?
Yes, all putting in our efforts, because the more we do, the less it is. Because as Rafa is, emphasizing that we are at this point in time where we really need to take serious and efficient steps to combat climate change crisis.
Right. So what are the areas that you're targeting? Because she's, heading out, she's basically demarcated different areas of Lahore. So
Yeah.
how do you go about your plantation drives?
Yeah, we've collaborated with different government departments,
Right.
and urban unit is a database. They, they have a lot of data, and we ask them that, about the parks and the green stretches that we can adopt. So whenever there's availability of one.
Okay.
So we adopted a patch at the Ring Road, and we did our first plantation
And
there.
you had some in Johor town as well.
Yes, Johor town is going to be in coming August,
Okay.
our plantation. And then we adopted a park at the nursery ground, which was close to Main Market. It was a huge chunk of land, and it was really one dusty ground, very much run down. PHA had done some, minor infrastructure. We are not only looking at planting trees,
Right.
although trees, absorb a lot of carbon from the atmosphere and bring down the carbon footprint, but we are also focused on spreading awareness, because this is the society, that we are focused on to change the mindset of the society. So for that reason, it's really important to spread the awareness about the climate change.
That I will come to, Zara, but this policy for which you do of course get credit, the Punjab Urban Peri-Urban Forest Policy 2019, since it was formulated till date, what all has been done under it?
This policy has been agreed upon by the federal government. It has been approved, so this is a big achievement, because until and unless the policy is not approved, it cannot be acted upon. So it has been just recently approved, and the government has taken a lot of steps, regarding the policy that was put forth by the urban unit. in 2019.
Of course, this is a global issue, this is an international issue. How can nations come together to actually fight it, and especially help those who are in need?
The international community signed a document in 1992, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that was meant to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. That has failed because we have produced more greenhouse gases internationally, or in the world has produced more greenhouse gases since 1992 than had ever been produced historically before.
But other than that, I think, sir, I think due credit should be given to this current government, and I think that takes me to my next question, because I think the entire focus, Rafi Saab has put it, that it's just not on planting trees. That is a very important part of the equation, but there are other ways of fighting climate change as well. So as civil society members, are you people working on that, like recycling of plastic and so many other things?
Of course, yes, of course. In 2019, we started a conversation with the government, which resulted in the government taking action over single-use plastics, and I think that was a very good initiative. Banning of plastics is also, I mean, everything has to be actually studied. Everything, we all are delving into this issue in a very, it's a crisis because we never worked on it, but now that we are working towards it, we need to also be very mindful of our decisions, because the decisions have to be very informed and calculated, because we don't want to create, so for example, if we say a universal ban on plastics, and then all of a sudden you realize that you need plastics for the medical systems, you need plastics for
other reasons,
like
Computers.
straws, and you know, for the special needs kids or people, you know, those kind of things. So we have to be mindful of it. But yes, single-use plastics was banned, and certain measures were being taken. Hiccups come, but that's okay. We are on the mend on that. Burning of garbage, that was another act that was passed by the Commissioner's office, and then there was a ban put on burning of garbage. Another one was plantation of the trees. You know, each household of 10 marla, 5 marla, 1 canal, you know. So all of these, they have to plant a certain number of trees, you know, something like that was brought about. And you know, so similar kind of policy decisions have been brought about through this forum.
And your organization is also working to that effect?
Yes, we are also educating people that they should not use single-use plastics. Everyone will say that you know, we are using just one bottle, but if there are 7 million people, then there are 7 million bottles. So it starts with one person, you know, and we have to understand.
Who are you targeting particularly?
We are targeting you know, the upper class. We usually have a stall at the farmers markets where more affluent people are coming. It is not, there's no like disparity, but the idea is to spread the message to the educated class first, because they have the resources, they can make a difference, you know, they can do something. The poor people are striving for their bread and butter, you know, they don't have the time to think on these things.
And you're also reaching out to educational institutions?
Yeah, education, we go give talks at education institutions and give presentations regarding, you know, climate change crisis and how important it is that we you know, try to think in a different way, you know, and it's not something to be taken lightly. And you know, we have these stalls that we put straw bags, and we tell people that, you know, they should, you know, buy straw bags, paper bags instead of plastic bags. We have glass bottles on our stalls just to tell people that, you know, don't buy plastic bottles, you know, buy glass bottles instead.
It's
so
basically,
we're trying to give environmental friendly options. Environmental friendly options are promoted at our stalls. You know, it's just like kind of trying to change the mindset of the society. Basically.
In the way you can, of course, and you in your capacity, in the limited capacity that you are, you are doing that.
We are also working with the government and now creating a green schools policy, and in which we are working with WWF and British Council and a bunch of other organizations, where we are creating a green schools policy, which will be, of course, applicable to the schools and all academic institutions. And of course, the whole idea behind this is to look at how we can reduce the carbon footprint, of course, look at plastics differently again, look at, you know, recyclable waste versus, organic waste, and, rainwater harvest, those kind of things. So that's another aspect that we are now quite actively engaged. We're working towards a cohort with RAFE, in which we are inviting people to become part of this fellowship, where we're creating climate leaders. We are also at this time working on several sending out an open call and inviting people to become part of share mitigation plans with us. So creating
Adaptation and
community
mitigation.
leaders, adaptation mitigation plan, and creating community leaders like that. People have ideas, people have opinions. We want to give them a seat on the table and work with them. So the inclusivity, interconnectivity, aspects like that are very, very important, and we are very actively now working towards that.
Right. So, but coming toward the conclusion of the show, and I think it was very rightly pinpointed by you earlier during the show that, we need some systematic change, institutional level change. But when it comes to policy, since you are the lawyer on the show, sir, what substantive policy changes can we bring? And are there any countries which we can look up to and say that, this is the model that Pakistan needs to follow?
Well, the answer to that second part of your question is very simple. The only countries that are doing well on climate policy are countries run by women. So Germany and New Zealand.
Thank you, sir.
Now, as far as the climate policy of Pakistan is concerned, I've already said that it's kind of out of date, and it happened during the 18th Amendment. So really moving forward, we should have a review of the policy and also see provincial policies inform the national policy rather than the national policy informing the provincial. We want a grassroots upward type of movement.
Right,
but
sir.
beyond that, Pakistan is signatory to something called the Paris Agreement, which is an international agreement that seeks to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. And under the Paris Agreement, countries are supposed to submit every 5 years a nationally determined contribution to greenhouse gas emissions reductions at the highest possible ambition they can have, so that this 1.5 degree limit can be met. Now, in 2016, when Pakistan submitted its initial national determined contribution, which was supposed to reflect its greatest ambition for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, we presented to the world a proposal where our greenhouse gases would increase by a factor of 400% between 2015 and 2030. Now, I understand that the 2016 period was also peak CPEC. We were taking on all these coal-fired power plants, which this government, I understand, has decommissioned 1 or 2 of. So, and also has a policy of introducing more renewable electricity onto the grid. And we're also in the process of revising our national determined contribution, because it's been 5 years since the last one we submitted. So when it comes to this nationally determined contribution, I would like to see a true ambitious reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which is well coordinated with the provinces and reflects the decentralized nature of what climate governance should look like.
That's very right, sir. But coming to you, Kutsi, I think it's very good to have, an artist on the panel as well. So we have a lawyer, and then we have a generally social activist as well as you. Artists working to make a difference that way. So how do you feel can art be used to educate people about environmental issues?
Great
It's a
question.
good one.
Great question.
So thank you.
No, this is a great question.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually a good question. We work with the arts. We work in art in public spaces. So we already are looking at art in a creative context, and we like to bring art into public spaces, into the public dialogue, into looking at contemporary issues and work with it, right? So, well, if Lahore Biennale Foundation manages the Lahore Afforestation Lahore group, and the idea is to work with the artists as part of, people on the table, part of the dialogue.
Right.
We are also members of the society and have something to say, and a lot of people have, and we have people, ideas to communicate, and people are listening.
To add a comment,
Please,
just
sir.
a reflection on that.
Yes.
It's such an important question. Please
It
continue.
is. So I think what it does is it humanizes the issue, and it actually brings a certain set of emotions
Right.
and feelings.
And
that
people relate to it more. There's this element of relatability.
Absolutely, and not one side fits all. So a lot of times when you're sitting in this forum also, there's a lot of facts sharing and a lot of intense conversation, because the idea is the position is so grim, right? But when you bring art into it, it feels a little bit more relatable, because we can't change the numbers and figures, but we have to still connect with each person on an emotional level, on a level where we can communicate and take the message forward.
Personally, I think it's something it's a very intelligent mode, basically, which would impact people.
Art reflects culture, and it's at some stage very worrying, given how far we are down the climate crisis, that none of our popular culture reflects the climate crisis. If you watch our movies, read our novels, read our magazines, it's not there.
Unfortunately so.
Unfortunately. And so that's why it's so exciting, so that this can be shown to be part of our culture, and it will be wonderful to see the result of this.
Which is why I also have you on my show today, because the show is about the society and we need to have a diverse. Would your concluding comment be in this regard, Zara, addressing the masses out there?
Yeah, because I think that each one of us is part and parcel of this climate change. That's why everyone should be concerned and take it seriously, and be conscious of how they are contributing towards it. Like, you know, on a very, it doesn't seem like big, but you know, if you opt not to eat meat, that is, you know, methane gas being reduced in the you know, environment. So, and if you opt not to use fossil fuels and move towards renewable energy sources like solar and wind, or thermal or hydro, you know, although there are controversies regarding hydro, you know, people feel that the dams would you know, misplace people and they'll have to migrate. But even then, you know, it's better than nuclear and the thermal, you know. We've got a lot of coal in Pakistan, and the government wants to produce energy from that area, but it's going to be dirty energy. So rather opt to clean and green, you know, energy solutions, and those are definitely solar and wind.
And I think that's very rightly put, because at the end of the day, you know, whether it's an institutional change, whether it's a policy change, I think the change at some level at least has to start from yourself too.
Exactly.
On that note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Sir Rafe. Thank you so much, Qudsiya, and thank you so much, Zara, for being here with us today. As we have discussed in detail, we have told you what the Pakistani government has done in order to fight climate change. We've also deliberated upon the fact that civil society is also striving very hard in order to fight this climate change. But at the end of the day, I think at a very basic level, we need to understand that the change needs to come from within. We as responsible citizens of Pakistan need to work in order to fight global warming and climate change, because this is something which affects our survival. And we can do that by making little and trivial changes, be it to our lifestyle, be it, you know, picking up important conversations about climate change. And we must understand the fact that this is something that we need to invest in, because environment is something in which we all live, in which we all connect, and in which we all meet. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.